Buying isn't always the right move, and that honesty matters much more than the hype. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Closing the Deal. I am one of your hosts, Sam Enright, and sitting across from me is my co-host, Zach Dickson. Zach, what is going on, man? What do we have on docket for everybody today?
Today we are talking about the age-old debate, renting versus buying, bringing it into 2026, updating it with all the newest, latest, and greatest information, and hopefully allowing the listeners to help make an informed decision when they go to make this one. Because I know that, again, age-old debate, we're always gonna have this one going on between renters, buyers, real estate agents, lenders, all of the above. It's a good topic for the listeners today, for sure.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, this is one that until we probably leave this earth will continue to be a talking point year in and year out for most people. As long as there's places to rent and as long as there's places to buy, the debate will continue for sure. So, obviously, if you guys did not already listen to, we did do a podcast episode last year talking about renting versus buying. So like Zach said, just a quick refresher here. Just wanted to, hit some new points and talk about some things as we get kicked off here into 2026. And as you guys prep and prepare to, potentially go buy your home or, re-sign a new lease or move to a new place, obviously weighing all your options and thinking about the critical important parts of that.
Absolutely. And as we dive into it, I think that, the spoiler alert, there really isn't a right answer per se. There's going to be right answers for different situations and different scenarios for people. So ultimately, just kind of want to highlight some of those things and help, people make that decision a little bit easier when they get dived into it.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really important point that I'm not sure we'll drive home enough, and that it's, there is, I think, because of how most of us were raised and what we were taught growing up in school or just family, there's this idealistic American dream where that ends in you buying a home. And, I've heard people get caught up in, well, I don't own one yet. I'm at this age and here's where my peers are and I'm not here and all these different things. Right. And it becomes very easy to put a lot of pressure on yourself to bite that bullet or take that chance or do it or whatever the case may be, even if you're not ready or maybe that's not something you genuinely want, right? There's people out there that don't genuinely want to buy a home or own a home. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. You can't force people into, these things, these boxes that they don't want to fit into. And so I think that's a really, really important point to drive home there is that there is no right answer for this. There is no one size fits all, and you are not wrong if you want to rent and you're not wrong if you want to buy.
Absolutely. I mean, you said it best in our opening there, buying isn't always the right move. It's about the honesty in the situation, making sure you're being honest with yourself, honest with the people around you. And ultimately that honesty is going to lead you to the best decision possible, for sure. So,
yeah.
So getting us started today with our first segment in our episode, we're going to talk a little bit about when renting makes sense for you. And so I would say, generally speaking, I think this is, pretty self-explanatory, but when you have a short timeline, when you have something, coming up that you're only going to be living in this certain area or this certain place for, 6, 12, 18 months. At that point, probably not the most ideal situation to buy a property, because ultimately, if you do buy that property and try to live in it for that short amount of time period and then try to go sell it again, ultimately after that short time period, there's never really a guarantee whether or not you're going to be making your money back on the sale. There's much higher of a probability that you're going to be able to get the money that you paid for it if you are selling it a lot later down the road. We have a lot of concrete data on real estate prices going backwards that they do over long periods of time, 20, 30, 40 years do go up. But in that interim time, in the short term, in that 1 year, 5 year span, within that 20-year, 30-year time period, it can definitely, have downturns. And so if you catch one of those downturns by trying to time the market, because you're in a short timeline period, it may not be the most advantageous situation for you as a home buyer. Another aspect of the, when renting might make sense for you mostly is, in that time of financial prep. A lot of times when we see clients and we see home buyers, they are not necessarily ready to go on day one, square one, from that very first moment of deciding, hey, I want to buy a home. And so ultimately there is going to be a lot of time in that period there of, prepping, doing the prep work, getting your finances right, getting your overall home buying picture in a place to where it is most advantageous for you. And so if you're not doing that prep work to begin with, it's probably going to be setting you up for a little bit of failure and not being able to, buy the home that you want to buy, and you're going to be settling at that point, or B, not being able to buy the home at all, and ultimately getting back to that renting spot and having to put that prep work in.
So Zach touched on a lot of good points there in the, why renting makes sense, right? Short timelines, when you have quick turnarounds and you're not exactly sure what, the next 6, 12, 18 months of your life's going to look like. Obviously, you get a little bit more flexibility, with renting than you do with owning. And so, once your 12 months is up, or maybe you even find an 8-month lease or a 6-month or whatever the case may be, right? You have the ability to pick up your stuff and move, and go where necessary. And so people that maybe enjoy a more nomadic way of life, that's probably going to suit you a lot more than having a home, that you're going to be set down with. And if you want to move on, have to go through the responsibilities of either selling that or getting a tenant in it or whatever goes into all of that, right? It's a much more of an undertaking than just, cleaning your hands and walking away from an apartment and going on, or, wherever, a house or whatever it may be, onto the next thing. So, and then financial prep was a big one in there that I think that a lot of people, we have a lot of people that rent and call us and are like, hey, my lease is going to be up in 2 months. We want to figure out, we want to be ready to go. And it's like, unfortunately, man, that's not really a realistic timeline, when it comes to buying a house, between getting pre-approved, between getting out there, finding a home that you actually want and that you actually want to spend your money on, and then getting into contract on said property, closing said contract, and then getting in. It's a very tight window, 60 days right there, to get you out of your apartment, especially when a lot of these apartments require like a heads up. You know what I'm saying? If you're saying that you're going to be gone, you could be finding yourself in a real pickle. And I feel like that's where people get into homes that, yeah, they kind of fit the mold, but not necessarily. And then, you talk to them a year later, they're like, well, we kind of rushed into this. So this house doesn't really meet this that we really wanted. You know what I mean? So I think taking that time when, in prepping, while renting, and getting an idea of what you want to do, and getting an idea of what that financial undertaking is going to be. How much money do you need to save? What's your monthly payment going to be? What's the adjustment to that going to look like? What area do you want to live in? Maybe having those conversations with your employers and different things about, if I move here, what does that do? Everybody's job's a little bit different, but, there's a lot of reasons, I guess, to say all of that. There's a lot of reasons why renting makes sense for a lot of people, right? Especially if you're just moving out of your house and just moving away from your parents. Sometimes people aren't willing to take that big of a jump and just go buy something right away. And maybe they need to dip their toe in the water and run a place and see what it's like to live on their own and go through those motions, right, before you jump out and buy the home. But other people are different. They just head first in the water and straight away ready to go. So it's really all up to you and how it works best, for you.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a big commitment, and when you make big commitments, you have to be really steadfast in what you're making the decision on, and the details in that. And you got to make sure that everything is lined up properly. You can't just kind of make rash decisions on big commitments. Usually that doesn't bode well in really any aspect of life, unfortunately. So definitely want to make sure that we are prepping on all fronts, not even just the financial front, but really just on all fronts when we decide that we want to dive into the home buying search. So why don't you get us started with segment 2? Why when buying makes most sense for homeowners?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, just like there's a lot of reasons why renting makes sense, there's a lot of reasons why buying makes sense. So for a lot of people, looking into that stability or into owning their own thing, right? So when you have, your own house, we've talked about this in previous episodes. There are, pros to owning a home that you're just not going to get with renting, right? You're not going to be making a payment every month that's paying down your principal balance, that's helping you build equity into your purchase. There's not if you rent an apartment or you rent in a house and the home appreciates, you're getting none of that. You have your money that's going to live there, and you have a roof over your head, and you have everything that comes with that, but you're not getting the added benefits that you normally would if you're owning a home. So stability is a big one. Long-term plans, if you know that you want to settle down, you want to start a family, this is the area we want to live in, this is where we want to send our kids to school. We have family nearby, we got wife's side of the family 30 minutes this way, we got husband's side of the family 20 minutes this way, and so it kind of is one of those things where it works out, right? And you've kind of considered all the different factors, and you've gone through and you've taken the time to evaluate everything, and it makes a lot of sense for you in that moment to be there. That's likely when buying is going to make more sense, because again, if you know that is something that you want, not saying things can't change, but when you have those sort of factors taken into consideration, it's much less likely that you're going to want to pick up and move 12 months later or 24 months later or whatever the case may be. And so you're going to get into what Zach talks about, some of those more added benefits of buying a home, where you have the appreciation, where you have the equity that where the principal that you're paying down, building the equity that you have in the home up, over a longer period of time than if you were just to buy a home and get rid of it 12 months later or 18 months later. So that's another big one. And then monthly payment control. So when you get a mortgage, most are going to be a 30-year fixed rate term. So your mortgage payment is not going to change over the life of the loan. Your loan amount's not going to increase, your interest rate's not going to increase, your term's not going to decrease, increase, whatever the case may be. You're going to be locked in with those terms when you go and get your mortgage on this property. Yes, taxes and homeowners insurance, those sort of things can adjust, just depending on your insurance agency, but you have free will to shop those things. You can go and get different homeowners insurance if your homeowners insurance becomes too much. And then, obviously taxes would be the one thing kind of out of your control when it comes to the county or the school district and everything that you live in. But, there is going to be a little bit more control there rather than rent. If you rent, your landlord could jack your rent up $150 every single year. They could bump it up $200. There really is no limit to what it is that they could change your rent to, right? And so there's a little bit of that variability there. Yes, you do have it for your certain term if you're locked in on a certain number of month lease, but as you continue to go down that path, right, you move from one lease to the next, you're going to have various different amounts of rents that are going to be charged across the spectrum, just depending on area that you choose to live in and size of home, apartment, etc.
Yeah, great stuff there for sure. Honestly, it's just stuff you don't really think about, honestly, when you go to get started. I really want to touch on the monthly payment control. I think that you really can't put that into perspective unless you do an example on how much a rental could increase over the time of when you're living there. Say you live in a specific apartment for 5 years, and they increase your rent. You have a 12-month lease each 5 year, so you have 5 12-month terms. If you are increasing that rent $100 each 5-year term, or each 12-month term, all 5 terms, you're now increasing that each year by $1,200 each year. So at the end of year 5, you're now paying almost $6,000 more a year than what you were originally. And so it's crazy when you think about it like that, and put it into perspective. And that is a legitimate thing. Like raising it $50, $100 per month per term is very, very legitimate. Is very normal in our rental market here in Central Ohio, and I would say probably across the country as well. And so I think that the monthly payment control is really something to hone in on as a home buyer and homeowner itself. It provides even more stability than what you were talking about originally, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. I mean, there's, you can't necessarily put a price on that. Like you said, there's a different feeling and emotion to that than, I've been there, been wondering, renting, hey, how much are they gonna, how much, if we want to stay here, how much are they gonna increase it this time, that sort of deal. So, when you have your monthly payment in terms locked in, it's definitely much different to know that, hey, this mortgage payment is going to be right here for the next 30 years or however long your term is. You don't have to worry about that necessarily going up, when we're looking at pure principal and interest, of course. So yeah, that kind of wraps obviously there, talking about when buying makes sense. Zach, what do you, or do you want to take us into to the last one here and just talking about, some of the biggest mistakes we see people make when it comes to considering, renting or buying, or just just, I guess, maybe even their feelings around it in general, some mistakes people make with maybe their perception.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you even touched on it a little bit earlier in the episode. And one of them is rushing into a decision, feeling like you need to do either one of them, just because of external factors. A good example that you provided was maybe your lease is up in 60 days and you have to give 60 days notice to your landlord, to your current landlord, that you want to move out, that you don't want to renew your lease. And that is a typical term, usually in our rental market here in Central Ohio. And so at that point, you've now given that notice. And so you can't go back and re-sign the lease. And now you have to go find something to buy in a very, very short time period. And that really will kind of lock you in to certain terms and certain things that maybe not be most advantageous for you, as the home buyer and as in your situation as a whole. And so if you're rushing into these situations and not putting the due diligence in that you have to, that it really is required, unfortunately or fortunately, when you go into buying property, you're probably going to breed a little bit of resentment there because of the situation that you put yourself into, and maybe buying a home that you didn't want, or maybe that isn't fitting all of your needs per se. And so those things are going to, you're going to look back in 6-12 months afterwards and you're going to say, why did I do that? What was the thinking? What was the rationale there? And so if we're able to kind of get ahead of that and, maybe stop that before it happens, that is the most ideal situation as a whole for you as the home buyer. And then I think it kind of goes hand in hand. Emotional decisions are just like rushing. Just if you see something right away, the first house that you see, and you maybe are just taken aback by it, fallen in love at first sight with this property, but you didn't necessarily do all the due diligence on the property itself. Maybe the taxes are super high and maybe outside of your budget or anything like that. Maybe not outside of your, qualified budget, but going back to our last episode, the acceptable budget, if you do that and kind of stretch that budget itself, making an emotional decision, that's something you're going to regret down the road, 6, 12, 18 months down the road. So I would say, just emotional decisions, rushing, things of that nature are going to be some of the biggest mistakes that I see buyers make. And it really, again, just goes back to the situation that you're in. These are the things that are going to dictate, the timeline, the prep work, all of those things are going to dictate how you make that decision.
Yeah. Yeah, man, a lot there. Ultimately, we live in a society where everything is almost instantaneous. If I want something, I can get on Amazon, click a button, and potentially have it here later this afternoon. If I want a new car, I can drive down to the car lot right now, and pretty much if I provide a pay stub and a W-2, could literally walk off the lot today with that car if I wanted to, right? And so, when it comes to home loans comparative to maybe where the rest of the world is at, it's not as quick of a process as what we are inundated with every single day. And so for most people, I think they get to these points, and because they've been so accustomed to that, they think that this is a quick process as well. And so if you have never been a part of it, you don't necessarily know. And so you can't really fault people for that. But that is one thing that we do see is, people that are renting, in my personal opinion, you got to be thinking about this 5-6 months before your lease is ready to go up. Obviously, maybe you don't need, if you're signing a lease at month 12, it might be overkill to, start the day you sign your lease when you have 12 months in advance. But, I think a perfect middle ground would be somewhere around months 5 through 7. If you really are considering, hey, I want to buy a home when my lease is up, okay, well, let's start laying the groundwork now, because you'd be surprised how many of those folks, maybe have credit issues they weren't aware of. And that can potentially take you anywhere from 30 to 90 to 120 days to work those things out. So right there alone, that's eating up 4 months of your time on the high end, right? If you have some credit things that need to be taken care of, that are going to, inhibit you from purchasing when you want to. So getting started on month 7, that's going to give you 3 months left over to where you could get pre-approved, you could get out looking for homes, and then it doesn't feel as a stressful of a process when you're trying to cram all of these things in. And then what happens is those people that at 60 days, they decide to start looking, right? They realize, hey, this is going to be out of reach. Okay, let's just re-sign the lease again. And now instead of buying on the timeline that they wanted to, now maybe they're another 12 months removed because they have to, sign another lease or whatever the case may be, because they're not prepared. So, my biggest takeaway from if you're renting and want to purchase is the sooner you can get in, the better. There's lots of lenders out there, like ourselves, that will take the time, have those conversations with you. And, it's not looking like, well, you don't want to buy right now. Well, come talk to us when you do. We can help lay that groundwork, that foundation, and talk to you about credit, talk to you about income, talk to you about all these different things that go into it. That way, when the time does come, you are prepared. And then on the other side of that, mistakes that we oftentimes see is people that have done the opposite of rushed. They've contemplated every single outcome that could potentially happen from buying a home. They've tried to map out this plan so perfectly that way there's nothing that could go wrong. And unfortunately, that's just not life, right? So I had asked my dad the other day, I was talking to him, I said, hey, Dad, what were, some of the things that, may life regrets or things that you wish you'd done differently, right? And one of the things that he said was, I wish I'd bought a home sooner in my life. And his thing was not necessarily that it was the opposite of being rushed, right? It was the thought, this fear of like, how am I ever going to make this happen? This feels insurmountable. And there's a lot of people on the other side that will stay renting and stay doing that because they feel ill prepared for so long, right? And or they like, how could I ever make a mortgage payment? How could I ever do this? And then they sit and they watch 2, 3, 4, 5 years go by, and the amount of money you could have paid down on principal balance, the amount of money you could have made in appreciation, the amount of, I guess, even just life skills you could have learned by owning your own home, the different things that go into that, you're almost robbing yourself of that when you sit and become overly analytical. We call that paralysis by analysis, right? When you sit and you think about a problem for so long that you never do anything about it. So I would say that's the other side of the spectrum to people that go into this situation, is sitting on the sidelines for far, far too long because of fear of what could potentially happen. Reality is you could be renting and you could lose your job, and then how are you going to pay your rent? The same scenario works if you own a home versus if you're renting. All of these things that go in your brain, those apply to all scenarios across the board.
Absolutely. Great stuff there. Great stuff. Because again, I think on both sides of the spectrum, in both of those examples, it's not going to be any negative to lay these things out and start doing the groundwork. Ultimately, on both sides of that spectrum, doing the groundwork is going to help you feel more comfortable in getting to that decision, and making that decision and making the correct one. There's no real negative to laying it out. Ultimately, if you do lay it out and this isn't something that's going to work out right away, then you have that groundwork laid out for the next time. And instead of not doing it, pushing it off, and then trying within 2 months to do all of these things, it's better to have that great groundwork laid out, ready to go. So either A, it's ready for, the next scenario, or B, convincing yourself that now is the right time to move on this.
Yeah, for sure, man. Ultimately you don't know until you know. So, getting out there, learning those things, and just, having those conversations, there's no harm in doing that. Even if you're not ready, but you're curious, obviously if you stumbled upon this podcast, there's plenty of content out there about, your curiosity and how to answer some of those questions. But, we're always here. We're always available to discuss, maybe your specific situation with you as well, and, give feedback and, point you in the right direction to the best of our abilities. So, I think, again, just take the leap, on either side of it.
Absolutely, because again, like I mentioned earlier, there's no right decision for the mass of people. The right decision is going to be based on your own situation, and ultimately, you are going to be able to figure out your right situation with the people around you, the lenders, the real estate agents, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to ultimately be the one to make that decision when it comes push to shove. And so, having this groundwork, having the plans, having, all of the prep work done before you go to make that decision is just going to help you make that decision easier, in my opinion. That's really the message of the episode as a whole.
100%, man. There, you cannot put a price on being prepared for any situation, right? There's just a level of confidence and clarity that comes over you when that is the case versus going in unprepared. There is a level of anxiety and anxiousness and, yeah,
I'm sure all human
confusion.
beings have really experienced it on both aspects too, on both sides
Oh
of the
yeah.
spectrums. And so it speaks volumes when you really feel those feelings in situations and can apply them to the next situation.
100%, man. 100%. Well, guys, I think that's it for us today. That's going to wrap on this episode of talking about renting versus buying here in 2026. Guys, if you know anyone who is struggling with this debate internally, feel free to share this episode with them. Hopefully, it can provide a little bit of clarity and give them a little bit of an insight into, how there is no right answer, right, between renting or buying. It's all, going to boil down to that person, but hopefully, give some different perspectives in the episode that will help gain a little bit or give a little bit of clarity to those people that are kind of sitting on the fence, not sure which direction to go.
Absolutely, guys. Well, we appreciate you guys tuning in to today's episode, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we will see you guys on the next one.
See you guys.